Mama Efua was a woman everyone in Kumasi respected. She had lost her husband many years ago, but she never let that break her. Instead, she poured all her love, energy, and strength into raising her only son, Kojo. To her, Kojo was not just her child, he was her reason to keep going. She worked in the market, waking up before sunrise, just to make sure he could go to school and never lack food or clothing. Every sacrifice she made was with one dream in her heart, that one day, Kojo would grow into a good man who would honor her sacrifice. When Kojo grew older and brought home a young woman named Ajoa, Mama Efua was hopeful. She thought, at last, her son would have a partner, and she herself would finally enjoy peace in her old age. She welcomed Ajoa warmly, treating her like her own daughter. She cooked for her, shared stories, and even gave her the same blessings she once gave Kojo. In her heart, she believed her family would only grow stronger. But life did not go the way Mama Efua imagined. From the very beginning, Ajoa looked down on her. She made sharp comments, rolled her eyes, and whispered things to Kojo that left Mama Efua feeling unwanted in her own home. Instead of stopping it, Kojo stayed silent, sometimes even joining in. The woman who had given everything for her family now found herself facing daily humiliation, left to wonder how love could turn into such disrespect. The trip was supposed to be a happy one. Kojo had promised to take his mother along on a short family journey, and Mama Efua was excited. She carried her small bag, packed with snacks and water, and sat quietly in the back seat while Kojo drove with Ajoa by his side. The road stretched ahead, the radio played softly, and for a moment, Mama Efua allowed herself to feel part of the family again. She looked out of the window, watching the trees and villages pass by, smiling to herself as memories of earlier years filled her heart. But Ajoa had other plans. From the start of the journey, she complained. She complained about how little space there was in the car, how Mama Efua coughed too much, how her presence was ruining the mood. Kojo tried to stay quiet, but Ajoa's words were sharp, like stones being thrown. At one point, she leaned close to Kojo and whispered, "Your mother is a burden. If you keep carrying her around, she'll never let us live our life." Kojo's hands tightened on the wheel, but he said nothing. When they stopped at a gas station to refill, Mama Efua stretched her legs and went to buy a small bottle of water. She returned, smiling gently, grateful for the short break. But as she reached the spot where the car had been parked, her smile froze. The car was gone. Kojo and Ajoa had driven away, leaving her behind. For a moment, she thought maybe they had moved to another spot. She looked around, scanning the rows of cars, her heart pounding. But no, there was no sign of them. She stood there, clutching her bag, feeling the world spin around her. People passed by, busy with their own lives, not noticing the elderly woman with tears in her eyes. The humiliation cut deep. This was not just an accident. She knew in her bones it was planned. Ajoa's words echoed in her mind. She's a burden. And Kojo, her only son, the boy she had raised with every ounce of her strength, had agreed. If not with his mouth, then with his silence. Minutes felt like hours. The sun burned down, and her legs grew weak. She sat on a bench by the side of the station, her water bottle untouched in her hand. A part of her wanted to cry, to wail loudly, but another part of her refused. She held herself together, her back straight, even as her heart cracked. The pain of being abandoned by strangers would have been heavy enough, but to be abandoned by her own blood was unbearable. At that gas station, Mama Efua's soul carried a wound no one could see. She realized that the child she had loved beyond herself was no longer the same boy she once held close. Something inside her broke, but another part of her quietly began to harden. This betrayal would not be forgotten. Mama Efua sat on the wooden bench at the gas station, her eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. The bottle of water in her hand had gone warm, but she didn't care. Cars came and went, people hurried past, but no one seemed to notice her. She felt invisible, like she no longer belonged to the world she had given so much to. Just as the heaviness in her chest threatened to crush her, a yellow and black taxi pulled in. The driver, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes, stepped out to stretch his legs. He noticed Mama Efua sitting there, alone, and walked closer. "Mama, are you all right? Do you need help?" he asked gently. For a moment, pride held her tongue. She wanted to say she was fine, but the tears that had been burning behind her eyes finally spilled over. The driver didn't rush her. He simply stood, waiting with patience that felt rare in a world that had just shown her so much cruelty. After a few minutes, she whispered, "My son, they left me here." The words were heavy, almost unbelievable even to herself. The driver's face tightened with pity and quiet anger, but he didn't press for detail. He only nodded and said, "Come, Mama. I'll take you home. Don't worry about money." Inside the taxi, the cool breeze from the open window brushed against her face. She watched the road as they drove, but her mind wandered far back in time. She remembered carrying Kojo on her back as a baby, even when her own body ached with hunger. She remembered selling vegetables in the market under the hot sun, bargaining with customers just so she could pay his school fees. She remembered skipping meals so he would never sleep hungry. Every joy she ever knew came from watching him grow. And yet, here she was, abandoned like an unwanted package on the side of the road. The driver tried to make small talk, asking where she lived and about her family, but she only answered in short words. Most of her energy was buried deep in thought. She was not thinking like a helpless old woman. No, something was stirring in her heart, a quiet fire she hadn't felt in years. The betrayal hurt, yes, but it also lit a spark. She realized she had allowed herself to be treated as though she were powerless. That would end now. By the time the taxi slowed in front of her gate, Mama Efua's tears had dried. She thanked the driver, who refused her shaky attempt to hand him some coin. "Keep it, Mama. You need it more than me," he said kindly. She blessed him with a soft prayer and stepped into her compound. As the taxi drove away, she stood in the silence of her home, her hands steady. For the first time in years, she was not thinking about Kojo's comfort or Ajoa's sharp tongue. She was thinking about herself. And in that moment, Mama Efua made a silent promise. She would never allow anyone to humiliate her again. Something inside her had changed forever. When Mama Efua entered her quiet home that evening, she felt both weak and strong at the same time. Her body was tired, her heart bruised, but her spirit was no longer broken. She sat down slowly on the old wooden chair in her living room and allowed the silence to wrap around her. For the first time since the gas station incident, she was not crying. Instead, her mind was sharp, replaying every humiliation she had faced under Kojo and Ajoa's roof. She thought about how they laughed at her, how they spoke to her as if she were a burden, and how easily Kojo had abandoned her. Then, like a flash of lightning, she remembered something she had almost forgotten in the years of trying to please them. The house they lived in, the house Kojo and Ajoa proudly called their own, was not truly theirs. That house had been bought by her late husband long before Kojo was even a man. All the documents had been carefully kept away after his death. With a steady determination, Mama Efua stood up and walked to her bedroom. She pulled out an old wooden box from under her bed, a box she had not opened in years. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the lid, but her eyes were clear. Inside were stacks of neatly folded papers, birth certificates, school records, and at the very bottom, the property documents. She unfolded the yellowing papers carefully, the official stamps still visible, though faded with time. And there it was, the house title carrying her husband's name, and with it, the proof that she was the rightful heir. As she read the words, her lips curved into a small, firm smile. For years, she had lived in that house like a guest, quietly enduring disrespect, thinking she had no choice. She had let her love for Kojo blind her to the power she still held. But now, with these papers in her hands, the truth was undeniable. The house was hers. Not Kojo's, not Ajoa's. Hers. She placed the documents gently on the table, sat back, and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her late husband, a man who had worked hard so his family would always have a home. She whispered softly, "I will not let your gift be wasted. They do not deserve it." The anger that had once burned like fire inside her now turned into calm steel. Mama Efua was not rushing to confront anyone, not yet. She understood that power worked best in silence. The same silence they mistook for weakness would now become her weapon. As night fell over Kumasi, Mama Efua neatly arranged the documents back into the box. But this time she kept it closer, within reach. She felt lighter, stronger, as if her husband's spirit stood beside her, reminding her of her worth. The betrayal at the gas station had cut deep, but now she had discovered the key to her own justice. The game had just begun. The next morning, Mama Efua woke up earlier than usual. The events of the past days still weighed on her heart, but she no longer felt helpless. She had something stronger than tears now. She had proof, she had power, and she had a plan forming quietly in her mind. She went about her chores slowly, sweeping the compound and boiling water for tea, but her thoughts were racing. She knew Kojo and Ajoa would never expect her to fight back. To them, she was just the old woman who cooked and prayed. They had no idea she held the very papers that could change everything. After finishing her tea, she took the wooden box with the documents and sat with it on her lap. She opened it once again and carefully went through the house title, making sure every stamp and signature was still valid. The more she read, the stronger her confidence grew. Then, with calm determination, she reached for her small Nokia phone and dialed a number she had not called in years. It belonged to Lawyer Mensah, an old friend of her late husband. He had handled the original purchase of the house and had always told her, "Madam, keep these papers safe. One day you might need them." When he answered, his voice was warm and respectful. "Mama Efua, it's been so long. What brings you to call me?" She explained everything, her voice steady but laced with quiet pain. She told him about the disrespect, the abandonment, and finally about her decision. "I want to sell the house," she said firmly. "It no longer feels like mine when I live there with. I would rather let it go and start fresh." There was a long silence on the line before the lawyer replied. "Mama, that is your right. And if you are sure, I will help you make it happen." Quietly. His last word brought a small smile to her lips. Yes, quietly, that was exactly what she wanted. No shouting, no warnings, no tears. Just action. Over the next few days, she met with him discreetly, carrying her documents in a simple black bag so no one would suspect. They went through every detail, making sure the paperwork was flawless. Each meeting gave her more strength. While Kojo and Ajoa carried on with their lives, laughing and bragging, they had no clue that the ground beneath their feet was already slipping away. At home, Mama Efua kept her face calm. She spoke little, answered questions softly, and never hinted at what she was planning. To them, she looked like a harmless old woman trying to keep the peace. But inside her, a storm was brewing. Every signature the lawyer stamped, every paper he filed, was like thunder rolling in the distance, warning of what was to come. For the first time in years, Mama Efua felt in control of her life. She wasn't begging for love or respect anymore. She was preparing to take it back, on her own terms, in silence. Kojo and Ajoa sat in the living room one evening, their laughter filling the house. To them, life felt perfect. They believed they had finally gained the freedom they wanted. Freedom from Mama Efua's presence, her quiet stares, and her old-fashioned ways. They saw her absence not as a wound, but as a victory. Ajoa leaned back on the couch, sipping juice from a glass, her voice dripping with pride. "Can you imagine, Kojo? No more of her nagging, no more of her sitting in the corner like a shadow. This house is ours now, and everyone knows it." She stretched her arms wide as if she owned the walls themselves. Kojo chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Yes, finally. We can invite friends without worrying about her listening in. People respect us more now because they see us as the real owners." His chest swelled with false pride. He remembered the times his mother had cooked meals and hosted neighbors, and now he bragged about taking her place, never realizing he was only living off her sacrifices. When their friends visited, the couple exaggerated their story. They boasted about how they managed the house, how they handled the finances, and how Kojo was head of the family now. Ajoa would laugh loudly and say, "Old people shouldn't cling to things they can't control. This house belongs to us now, it's our future." Their friends, impressed or jealous, nodded along, never knowing the truth. Some even envied them, thinking they had risen quickly in life. But behind their show of confidence, their arrogance was clear. They never once wondered how Mama Efua was surviving after they abandoned her. Not a single thought crossed their minds about her sacrifices or the role she played in their lives. They only saw themselves, glowing in the attention of others. At night, Kojo sometimes felt a small sting of guilt, but Ajoa's words drowned it out. "She was holding you back," she would remind him. "Now you're free. Now you're a man of your own." He believed her, convincing himself that abandoning his own mother was somehow proof of strength. What they didn't know was that while they mocked her, she was already steps ahead. While they bragged about being in control, the real owner of the house had already begun the process of letting it go. Their so-called freedom was an illusion, a bubble waiting to burst. They sat at their dining table, laughing with their guests, raising glasses to toast their success. Ajoa even joked, "If Mama ever comes back, she'll have to knock before we let her in." The group erupted in laughter, unaware of how ironic those words truly were. In their pride, they could not see the storm quietly building around them. To them, the house was permanent, their pride unshakable. But the very foundation of their joy was already slipping through their fingers. Their downfall was not far. It was already at the door, waiting to knock. The day of the sale came quietly, without fanfare, without warning. While Kojo and Ajoa lounged in their living room, Mama Efua was sitting in a lawyer's office across town, her documents neatly laid out on the polished desk. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, and the ticking of a wall clock was the only sound as she waited. Her hands were steady, though her heart beat with a mix of nerves and anticipation. She knew this was not just business. It was the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The buyer arrived shortly after, a wealthy businessman dressed in a sharp suit. He was polite, his tone respectful as he greeted Mama Efua with a small bow. He had no idea about the storm behind her calm face. To him, it was just another property transaction. But to her, it was the final act of reclaiming her dignity. Lawyer Mensah reviewed every document carefully, cross-checking signatures, reading aloud where necessary. Each page signed felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of Kojo and Ajoa's arrogance. When the final signature was made and the stamps pressed down, the lawyer slid the receipt across the desk. The businessman's assistant transferred the money into Mama Efua's account, confirming it with a firm handshake. For a moment, She just stared at the receipt in her hand, her eyes misty. She had done it. The house that had once been her pride, then her prison, was no longer tied to her son or his cruel wife. Yet, the moment was not without pain. Memories rushed back, her late husband buying the house, her young Kojo running through its halls, her own laughter filling its rooms during happier times. Selling it felt like cutting away the last thread that connected her to those days. But she knew it had to be done. Holding on to the house had only given her grief. Letting it go gave her peace. She left the office with her head high, the lawyer walking her out with a reassuring smile. Outside, the sun was warm, and the streets of Kumasi buzzed with life. She clutched the envelope of official papers tightly against her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt like the one in control. Not the abandoned mother, not the silent victim, but a woman who had chosen her own path. Meanwhile, Kojo and Ajoa remained blissfully unaware. They sat in the house, laughing and enjoying the illusion of ownership, never suspecting that the roof above them already belonged to another man. As Mama Efua returned home that evening, she sat on her bed and whispered a prayer to her late husband. "It's done," she said softly. Her voice carried both sadness and triumph. She had lost a son to disrespect, but she had regained herself. The house was gone, but in its place she held freedom, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice was already on its way. A few days after the sale, Mama Efua sat at her small wooden table with a pen in her hand. The room was quiet, the air heavy with both memory and resolve. In front of her lay an envelope, crisp and plain, waiting to carry a message that would shatter the pride of Kojo and Ajoa. She placed the official sale receipt inside carefully, making sure the inked stamps and signatures were clearly visible. Then she took a fresh sheet of paper and began to write, her handwriting slow but steady. Her words were few, but each one carried the weight of years of sacrifice and betrayal. "Next time you leave someone behind, make sure they don't own the roof above your head." She paused after writing it, her lips curling into a sad smile. It wasn't anger that guided her pen, it was truth. She had no desire to curse them, no desire to beg. This was her final statement, simple and sharp, one they would never forget. She folded the note neatly, slipped it into the envelope beside the receipt, and sealed it shut. As she pressed the glue down, she felt a strange calm wash over her. The letter was not just paper, it was her voice, her justice, and her closure. The next morning, she walked slowly to the post office. The workers greeted her politely, not knowing the storm hidden in the small envelope she held. She handed it over with steady hands, paid the fee, and watched as the clerk stamped it and placed it in the outgoing pile. In that moment, it was out of her hands, literally and figuratively. She had done what she needed to do. Meanwhile, in the house that no longer belonged to them, Kojo and Ajoa continued their days without a clue. They still bragged to their friends, still boasted about their ownership, and still laughed about how they had gotten rid of Mama Efua. The envelope traveled silently across the city, carrying the truth they thought would never come. When it finally arrived, Ajoa was the one who picked it up. She tore it open quickly, expecting bills or invitations. But as her eyes scanned the receipt, the color drained from her face. She read it once, twice, then shoved it into Kojo's hand. His eyes widened as he took in the words, the official stamps, and finally, the short note. The sentence hit him harder than any slap. "Next time you leave someone behind, make sure they don't own the roof above your head." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Their laughter, their bragging, their pride, all of it vanished in a second. The paper trembled in Kojo's hands as the weight of reality sank in. The house was gone. The walls around them no longer belonged to them. Far away, Mama Efua sat peacefully on her veranda, sipping tea. She didn't need to see their faces to know what the letter had done. Justice had been delivered quietly and powerfully, and she felt lighter than she had in years. Kojo and Ajoa had barely recovered from the shock of the letter when the Real storm arrived. For days, they lived in denial, convincing themselves it was some kind of mistake. "Maybe it's fake," Ajoa insisted, pacing the living room. "Your mother is just trying to scare us. There's no way she'd sell this house." Kojo clung to her words, though deep inside, fear gnawed at him. The official stamps and signatures on the receipt refused to leave his mind. Then one afternoon, the knock came. It was not the knock of a neighbor or a friend. It was firm, commanding, the kind that carried authority. Kojo opened the door to find a well-dressed man flanked by 2 assistants. The man introduced himself calmly. He was the new owner of the property. He handed Kojo a copy of the sale documents and gave them strict instructions. "You have 2 weeks to vacate this house. After that, the law will handle it." Ajoa's jaw dropped. She snatched the papers and scanned them frantically, her hands trembling. Everything was real. Everything was legal. The house was no longer theirs. Kojo felt the ground shift beneath him. The pride he once carried now replaced with cold panic. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The same friends who used to sit in their living room, drinking and laughing, now whispered and mocked them. So the house wasn't even theirs, some laughed. All that bragging for nothing. The couple who had once been admired for their supposed success were now the subject of ridicule. Their arrogance had turned into a public joke. Inside the house, tension grew daily. Ajoa blamed Kojo for being weak. If you had stood up to your mother, she wouldn't have dared do this, she shouted. Kojo, filled with guilt and shame, could only sit in silence. He remembered the sacrifices his mother had made, the years she had carried him, and now the memory of abandoning her at the gas station burned him like fire. His heart was heavy, but it was too late. Each day, the deadline crept closer. Boxes lay half-packed, their laughter replaced with bitter arguments. The house that once felt like a palace now felt like a prison closing in on them. The neighbors who used to envy them no longer visited. Instead, they pointed and sneered when passing by. Kojo and Ajoa's names became a lesson whispered among households. Pride comes before a fall. On the final day, the new owner returned with officials. Kojo and Ajoa had no choice but to step out, their belongings piled embarrassingly on the roadside. The humiliation was complete. No friends came to help them, no one offered a kind word. They were alone, stripped of the home they once called theirs. As the gates closed behind them, Kojo looked back at the house with tears in his eyes. It was not just the loss of walls and a roof, it was the loss of dignity, of respect, of everything they thought they had. For the first time, he realized the true cost of betraying his mother. And it was a price far heavier than he ever imagined. With the money from the house sale, Mama Efua made choices that brought her peace instead of pain. She bought a small but beautiful home on the quieter side of Kumasi. The house was not as big as the one she had sold, but it was hers alone. The walls were painted fresh, the garden had space for flowers, and every corner felt warm and welcoming. For the first time in years, she could walk through her own doorway without fear of insults or humiliation. She didn't stop there. With part of the money, she invested in a small business, a provisions shop near the market. It wasn't grand, but it was steady, and it gave her purpose. Neighbors came by not just to buy sugar, rice, or soap, but also to greet her with respect. They admired her strength and often said, "Mama Efua, you are a woman of wisdom." Their kind words reminded her daily that dignity cannot be stolen, it must be protected. In her new life, she surrounded herself with people who truly cared for her. Other widows visited, young women sought her advice, and children loved listening to her gentle story. She was no longer a burden, no longer invisible. She was seen, valued, and celebrated. Sometimes, late in the evening, she would sit on her veranda, sipping tea, and smile to herself. The betrayal had hurt deeply, but it had also freed her. She had turned her pain into strength and her silence into action. Kojo and Ajoa had lost more than a house. They had lost the chance to honor the very woman who gave them everything. Mama Efua, with grace and quiet strength, had reclaimed her dignity and built a new beginning.